pumped for it. I am falling in love with talking to y'all on here. And I'm just, I feel like I'm nerding out on the film industry a little late in life, and that makes me that much more interested in almost like the business side of this. And that's, I mean, if you follow Ben on Film on any of the platforms from like TikTok to Instagram to YouTube, then you're used to me talking about the business side of film. And it's just, there's this such a frustrating disconnect between the places where the things that filmmakers need to do in order to make their films succeed and their artistry. And it's really, as a filmmaker myself, but as somebody who talks to a lot of filmmakers, I see the frustration that there's just, filmmakers are forced to put on these two completely different hats: the business side of the film industry and the production side of the film industry, the artist side of the film industry. And we are generally terrible business people. I see the other side of this because I am somebody who has spent 15 years in tech, working on tech, in the tech industry, on huge, on small startups all the way up to these multi-billion dollar, 20,000 employee corporations in marketing departments. So kind of, I've seen what it takes to market products successfully at a global level, and I see that against what filmmakers are forced to do and what they know well and what they don't know well. And that's just been, I don't know, that's a diatribe, but I'm loving this conversation. I appreciate everybody who's talked to me on these platforms as we've been digging into this. For those on YouTube and Instagram, you're going to see a new logo. Testing it out. Let me know what you think. But this is something I'm playing around with. I'm calling it Garviscope. The whole idea is that we are a company that focuses entirely on freeing filmmakers from the business side of the industry so that they can focus on their art. One of the things I want to talk about today is the data side of the film industry, because I think the data side of the film industry is broken, and I think that the lack of reporting and the lack of data on the business side of the film industry is obscuring what's going to be a crazy sizable way that this industry works. And that is going to be around micro budget films. Let me know if you have been in this situation. Have you logged into a streaming platform recently? Netflix, Hulu, what do they call it now? Max, Apple TV Plus, what have you, even Tubi, and flipped around for an hour like, oh my God, there's nothing to watch. I mean, it's not that there's truly nothing to watch, but the things that are being presented to you are either things that you've seen before, or they're in niches that aren't really interesting to you, or the quality isn't high enough, or like there's a huge prevalence now of these like made for Netflix movies that are the Netflix equivalent of like a Hallmark Channel movie, like made for TV level quality, and they're not new or unique stories, but there's something to watch, and you get the vibe that Netflix and other streaming platforms are creating films that are much higher budget than they need to be in order to just release content. The lack of reporting in the industry, and this is what I want to talk about today, I think is obscuring that there is much higher demand for new content and new niche content than what these platforms are able to keep up with. And so it's hiding that there is a large budget film bubble that is about to pop. And when it pops, it's going to refocus a ton of money and resources toward micro budget filmmaking. And let me give you, for those of you who don't have context, let me give you some information around how Hollywood-ish industry defines movie budgets, right? So you have the types of movies that you hear about as indie films going to festivals like Festival de Cannes or or Sundance typically have a budget at or above $1 million. And I know if you're not in the industry, you're like, $1 million? That's a lot of money for this thing to be considered independent. I agree. We have so many stories in the film industry about people making movies for less than $10,000 that are incredible movies. The one that's like most prevalent to me is El Mariachi, made by Robert Rodriguez. I bring that up because we did a live stream about it last week and talking about the book. But there's Primer, Shane Carruth, made for $7,000. There's Hundreds of Beavers, which was produced for $150K, and it grossed about $500,000 at the box office. But we don't hear these stories about these micro-budget projects that often because there's such a high level of gatekeeping in the film industry around studios and the logistics and level of effort that it takes to get a movie to a theater. Because the primary metric that everybody in this industry is managing to is this concept of box office. And box office needs to be co-reported with streaming numbers, and we're getting better about this. But the streaming numbers we see they have this inherent need to be self-reported by streaming platforms. So like, if you're Hulu and you have all of this wealth of dog hair. If you have this huge wealth of data around how users are behaving and performing on your platform, what they're watching, the types of genres that are being successful, the directors and films that are being successful, what motivation do you have to share that data publicly? So that other streamers can benefit from it? What motivation do you have to share that data publicly so that filmmakers that are outside of your immediate circle benefit from it? You really don't have a lot of motivation to share that data, and that's created this huge hole. Nobody knows, short of what's being publicized by these platforms, what people are watching. But we know as users that when we go into these platforms, we feel like there's nothing to watch. Despite millions of movies on a lot of these platforms, at least hundreds of thousands. There's no true shortage of what to watch. But I think that I can only speak for myself, but I feel like there is a huge demand for niche content, right? So like I'm an art house guy, right? I like these Kim Trier movies, these Celine Sciamma movies. I'm digging through Walter Salles right now and watching all of his movies. I want to watch these super art house movies. Walter Salles is a great example. So if you don't know who he is a Brazilian director. And imagine if you are from Brazil, whether you live there or you're an expat and you're out in the world, you're Portuguese speaking natively, and you care about Brazilian stories. When a movie comes out on Netflix that is from Brazil or in Portuguese, you want the platform to share that with you because then you inherently want to watch it. That's demand, right? You have demand. That the product is the movie, you're the consumer, you have demand for that movie. Well, the movie that you can make in Brazil with $50,000, $100,000, $1 million is 5 times better than the movie that you could make in the United States for the same money because of the exchange rate, because of mostly the exchange rate, okay? But what that's to say is you have demand for that movie, and for $50,000, Netflix can make the equivalent of $1 million movie quality wise. And there are hundreds of millions of Brazilians out there that would watch that movie. You can say the same thing about Ghana, about maybe a little bit less about Canada. That's not a jab at Canada. Just, Canadians can benefit from American movies, and we can benefit from Canadian movies. But the demand is out there, and the demand is out there for movies that don't like nobody who's watching a movie cares about the budget when they're watching the movie. If the story is relevant to them, they are going to watch that movie regardless of the budget, as long as the quality is there. And so when you watch a movie like, unfortunately, I'm top of mind right now is Shane Carruth. If you watch Primer or Upstream Color, that is a very high quality. Those are high quality movies that were made for much cheaper than what Hollywood typically pays for a movie. So you see these movies like Red One. Why are they all called Red? Red One, The Gray Man. These movies that are produced for hundreds of millions of dollars on these blockbuster size streaming platforms like Netflix. And you think to yourself, at what point can Netflix no longer afford to spend $100 million on a movie? At what point do they say, oh, we get enough high quality content from non-blockbuster size budgets that focuses on the niches that people will watch regardless, and they start to shift their money toward those projects? Would you rather, as somebody who owns one of these companies, spend $1 million on 50 films that all speak to a very specific audience around the world, or $100 million on one film that is only going to be watched by people who like Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson? At some point, I think that there has to be like a reconciliation. And so I wanted to go live today and talk about that a little bit. So a Garvis scope on the mind. Like I have this, like, what does it mean to be, oh, thank you for the, oh, that's an ad. Okay. The demand, I think, is shifting, but we don't know it. We don't have evidence of it because the data behind that is being gatekept by the streamers themselves. They don't self-report their numbers unless it's a huge success, and so we just don't know. But like the data for those of you that are on platforms where I'm screen sharing, let me screen share this with you. This report is a little bit old, but it basically looks at the number of Hollywood movies that have been released on average that are over $100 million in budget. And for those who can't see it, this chart does this. Basically, from 1995 through 2015, there's just this upward trend of how much studios are spending on movies. And that's all fine and dandy up until 2015 because the majority of people are not watching content on streaming platforms, and we don't have this huge demand for content where we feel like the content is free, and that because, we pay monthly, we don't think about the fact that we're paying for Netflix every single time we log into Netflix. It's just, to us, it's like, this is paid for, I invested in this, they're supposed to deliver new content to me. At what point do we see the demand for those films do this relative to the overall number of films that can be delivered for that budget? It's going to cross at some point. So I think that we're headed toward the pop of a bubble that is the big budget streaming film. And at some point, we're going to see these studios shift and these streamers shift toward creating content that is scalable and niche. We talk about the same thing in the startup world all the time, right? Like the most successful startups aren't the people that oh, we're going to do everything. We're going to be the best at everything. Like if Jeff Bezos himself walked into a venture capital firm today and said, I want to build a company that ships books, that ships Legos, that does dog food, that creates generic products, that does cloud services for tech companies, and has a global delivery network, and also is a creator of entertainment services. Venture capital firms would laugh him out of the room. There's no way that he would get investment for that, right? So you, as a startup founder, you have to niche down. You have to say, what is the thing that I am uniquely propositioned to deliver? What is the one thing I'm going to focus on that? And at some point I can scale my business to be more things than that. And so I think at some point we're going to see these large streaming platforms invest in niches to say, okay, we are going to produce 10 films from Ghana next year, and we're going to spend $10,000 per film, and we're going to get 10 unique films for the Ghanan audience. We kind of see that a little bit, right? Like these are the at a much higher scale, and almost like a proof of concept would be something like Squid Game, and the fact that that Squid Game had cross-market potential and took off globally is beneficial in many ways to Amazon. But when they invested in Squid Game, you actually see this the original cast and crew and directors and producers of Squid Game really didn't make much money off of that initial boom, and that's part of why it took so long for the second season to come out. Everyone was like, yeah, we'll totally do another season, but you're gonna pay us this time, right? There's very low risk in volume content creation, and when the content is easier and easier and easier to make, like it is right now, because you have, you know, like the Sony FX3 camera can do $100 million budget level quality, but for like $5,000, the cost of these movies gets lower and lower and lower and lower. And there's such a false narrative that's sold in Hollywood on a daily basis about how much money it takes to do something. At some point, there has to be a reconciliation. And again, like, I think that we're pretty close to the precipice of this. We're about to see this bubble pop, regardless of whether or not we see it in the data right now, because the data isn't truly being reported by these streaming platforms. There's like another chart. Again, this was written in 2019. If you don't know Stephen Follows, what a cool website. This guy does really, really deep dives into the data behind. He doesn't write very often, but when he does, it's really cool deep dive stuff. It's like there was a story that was like how much do kissing scenes impact the total audience of a movie? Like, super off the wall stuff, but just looks at data. And he did this cool analysis that kind of looks at like what is the relationship between a movie's budget and their statistic probability of having high, like, equivalent domestic gross box office numbers. So basically, for those of you that don't want to be inundated with the lingo, how many movies that are paid more for, like that take more resources to build, to create, how many of those actually yield better results? And he found that there is pretty much a rough correlation, right? Over time, from 1999 to 2018, as budgets increased, the return on those investments increased. Now, this goes through 2018, so you can imagine that 2020 is like, where it's like do, and then 2020 is like, but it was already starting to dip. Like the return on those investment was already starting to dip in 2018. Fast forward 7 years, we don't have that data, but it's probably very likely that the likelihood of investor money being recouped by a project on streaming platforms has gone significantly, like on average, has gone significantly lower than the amount of money that people are investing into these things. And at some point, Netflix, Hulu, whoever cannot keep up with that, and they are going to have to spend money on micro-budget projects. So I am obsessed with this idea that we are getting pretty close to a world where micro-budget projects are going to start to get picked up. And whether you're a filmmaker or a crew member or just a fan of movies, this is going to be a very good thing for you. One, it's going to push you to flex your creative muscles, right? Like if you're used to working on a multi-million-dollar budget film and you are a director of photography and you're used to having this big crew working under you, that is going to change. You're going to need to be more hands-on. Fine. Is that going to create a ton of new opportunities for people who are just starting out and have the competency to do a good job? It's very possible. And so I think that can be a really awesome thing in this world. beyond that, we need to talk about the data side of this, because the data side of this just kind of sucks for everybody, right? Like the individual ownership of data for reporting, like the closest source of information that we could have as indie micro budget filmmakers around how the industry is performing would be if a company like FilmHub, which, if you're not familiar with FilmHub, they are kind of a film distributor. If you're a filmmaker, you take your film to them and they take a cut, but they take a cut on your total revenue, but they help you get your film onto streaming platforms. They work as kind of the intermediary that gets you to those platforms. They have data around how a long list of indie and micro budget films perform, because they have the reporting that comes out of the platforms, and they use that information to eventually pay the filmmakers. But there really isn't anybody else in the industry that has that type of data or could provide that type of data to you. So I think that solution has to be solved. And like, again, so if you're on YouTube or Instagram, like I've been popping up this little Garvascope logo. I think that this, I'd be interested in what you think based on this whole diatribe that I went on. But I think that there's a very valid use case for a company whose whole goal is to close that reporting gap. That having information on how films perform when they are less than $1 million in budget, there are probably thousands of them made every year, feature-length films that were made for very little money. There's no reporting on them. There isn't a place short of IMDb, really, where indie filmmakers can go to report it. And IMDb putting that information in there is largely gate kept by having like a pro subscription. There's no incentive for filmmakers to go and report how their films perform. There's no company trying to close the data gap by reaching out to like a film hub of the world and ask them to share their data and help them process that data. And there's no company trying to say, like, how can we look at this data to make better decisions about the types of filmmakers we should prop up? Who is succeeding? Who isn't succeeding? There's no like industry standard or like flag bearer that is trying to hold that up for the rest of the world. And that's, I think, detrimental to the industry. It has us making decisions, not just us, but even billion-dollar studios making decisions in a vacuum without information that helps them make better decisions as we're headed into this like democratized world of filmmaking. I mean, if any industry in the world has been somewhat democratic from the start, in a lot of ways, it's been independent filmmaking. If you separate that out from, major studio stuff or Hollywood stuff. Indie filmmaking has been a pretty democratic process, short of anything that is $250,000 and up worth of funding. I don't know. I think that would be a really cool project to work on. If you think that would be cool, let me know. I'll probably circle back on this whole Garvascope thing, but I've been working on like a business plan. I think that like there's a real need there, but how do you monetize that? Is it a subscription service? It would need to be free to filmmakers. Why else would they be incentivized to report their data? But you also have to have some form of revenue where you could go out and pay for partnerships with a company like FilmHub. How do you motivate companies like Hulu/Disney and Netflix and Apple to share data around streamer behavior? But if you can close those gaps and you can like look at how films perform based on their budget and find films that are $5,000 films, $10,000 films that are having much higher return on their investment on platforms like streaming platforms, and you can move away from looking at box office gross as the measurement of success. There has to be data right now that is supporting a trend in the industry toward funding smaller films and doing more small films that are high quality instead of spending $100 million on a movie. So that's what I wanted to talk about today. You have all been fantastic for listening to me rant and dig into these ideologies that are on the fringe of filmmaking. I guess I am the hippie of the filmmaking industry, just out there talking about, I've seen some stuff, man. I've seen some stuff. Thanks for watching. I'm going to be back tomorrow. I don't know what we're talking about, but it's going to be movie related. You can bet your butt on that. And yeah, have a fantastic day. It's only Tuesday, which means that there's a lot of week left. I love y'all. Have a great day.